So Kelsey is in, oh, apologies. Kelsey is an intelligent analyst on preventing targeted violence team at the Colorado Information Analysis Center. And this organization is referred to as CIAC. In this role, Kelsey focuses on domestic violent extremism by conducting research and analyzing intelligence associated with ideologically motivated violence and civil unrest. Prior to joining CIAC, Kelsey worked in humanitarian aid and refugee resettlement, gaining valuable experience serving people who are often recovering from and fleeing violence and terrorism. Her educational background includes an undergraduate degree from Arizona State University and a master's degree from the University of Colorado, where her research focused on the psychology of mass violence and genocide, violence against women in international conflicts, and the intersection of misogyny, mass violence, and extreme ideology in the United States. Also joining us from CIAC is Sydney Johnson, who is an intelligence analyst on the Preventing Targeted Violence team at CIAC. Her primary focus is on non-ideologically targeted violence, including mass public attacks, workplace violence, school attacks, and hate crimes. Prior to working with CIAC, Sydney received her Bachelor of Science from Metropolitan State University in Denver and a Master's of Science from King's College London in forensic mental health research. She's worked as an emergency medical technician and within the co-responder program for Englewood and Littleton, Colorado Police Department. So thank you so much for joining us today, Kelsey and Sydney. Every day it seems like there's more and more things that are occurring and that are impacting our libraries either directly or off to the side, so just peripherally. So thank you so much for being here. Take it away.
Great, thank you so much. So again, hi, my name is Sydney Johnson. I'm a preventing targeted violence here at the CIAC, the Colorado Information Analysis Center. I'm going to be briefly going over what the CIAC is and some of the services the CIAC as a whole offers. And then Kelsey will be going into what our preventing targeted violence team specifically is and does, and then even more specifically, how it pertains to Colorado libraries and how we can increase that partnership. So the Colorado Information
Sydney,
Analysis
I
Center.
apologize.
Yes.
If I can just interrupt, I apologize,
Sure.
everyone. Please, by all means, feel free to drop any questions you have into the chat, and we'll go ahead and share those as we go. There'll also be a time available at the end for question and answer. So my apologies, Sydney.
No apologies needed. I appreciate that. Questions at any time, feel free to interrupt me. So the CIAC is under the Colorado Department of Public Safety, and then under that is under the division of the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Kelsey, you can do next slide. So the Department of Homeland Security began after 9/11 with this mission. Following the 9/11 Commission report that information was not shared, analysis was not pooled, effective operations were not launched. So it began with the mission of preventing and responding to terrorist attack and other disasters due to the lack of information that was shared preceding that event. So fusion centers is what the CIAC is a fusion center. They're under the Department of Homeland Security. You can do next slide. That's with the mission of serving as a focal point within the state for receiving, analyzing, and sharing threat-related information amongst multiple sectors. Every state in the United States, as well as Guam, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, have at least one fusion center. And some states, like California and Texas, actually have multiple fusion centers. So within the CIAC, we have many analysts housed here with a wide variety of analytical focuses that include cybersecurity, gangs, narcotics, our team of preventing targeted violence, and many more, which we'll talk about more in just a minute as well. Next slide. In 2025, we conducted a threat prioritization program survey. We surveyed 198 people, at least those were the amount that responded, which indicated the top 10 focus areas for us per our partners. Targeted violence is number 2 on that list, but this also helps to illustrate the broad set of things that we do focus on, though it spans a lot more categories than just this. You can do the next slide. So some of our collaborative partnerships, again, we look at federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial, as well as private sector partners. This is a list of just a few of the partners that we have collaborations with. which is really helpful for information sharing purposes. If we don't have a connection to someone, but you need to be in connection with someone, we're a really good resource to reach out to. And if we don't have that connection, we can pretty easily find that connection for you, whether that's federal, state, local, or any other organizational sector. Continue next, then we can go to the next. So some of the analytics that we focus on include strategic analyses. On the left side here, you're going to see some of the threat topics. These are primarily what different analysts here at the CIAC focus on. Our targeted violence team has 3 analysts and 1 supervisor. A lot of the other analysts are just sole analysts for each of these topic areas. And then on the right, you'll see some of the analytics support that we can provide. Some of this may be relevant, some of it might be law enforcement specific, as well as on the next slide that we'll see. One of the things that I want to highlight on this that I think would be really relevant for libraries specifically are at that bottom on the right side, we see threat assessments and checks. Threat checks are specific to events. We do ask that if you do request for a threat check, we get that at least 2 weeks in advance so that the CIAC analysts have enough time to produce one. What threat checks look at are specific events that are occurring, perhaps at your library, as a lot of events do occur. You send that information to the CIAC. We can do multiple things, but one of the things we can do is a threat check where that event will go to most of the analysts here, and they'll provide their analytical insight as far as open source social media checks, a cybersecurity check on the URL to see if there are similar URLs out there with malicious activity, as well as just broader considerations to keep in mind for the event from each team that's associated at the CIAC. If you don't need a full threat check done, the CIAC can also provide just open source social media monitoring as a whole, just to make sure there's no threats popping up, no protests popping up, just to keep a general eye on the safety for events and security. Go to the next slide. So within tactical analysis, we do have a watch center here, and I will put their email in the chat. We do want us to be a primary point of contact for all of you, but the watch center does operate 24/7 and the PTV group does not. So if there is something urgent but not emergent, obviously contact local authorities if that's what's necessary. But if there's something that pops up last minute, we might not be able to respond right away, but the watch center is really good at that because there's someone that's always working that. They're the main intake, the main hub. The watch center is actually where I started here. So if you have any questions specific to that, I've got all the knowledge. But they are the ones who do primary monitoring for events as well as threat check intake, as well as general partner support in hours that we might not be able to provide that support. So I'm gonna put that in the chat really quick.
Sydney, while you're doing that, can you highlight what sort of things with that intake or vetting, what sort of events or ideas would be relevant to that?
Sure. So a lot of the times events that come in, it can be anything. There's a wide variety of things. Sometimes there's cultural events. I'm trying to think if there's any examples I can give. Sometimes there's a large group of elected officials that are coming for an event, and sometimes that's specific to, we want to make sure that the elected individuals that are coming in are protected and there's no threats specifically being made against them. But sometimes there's markets that are happening, farmers markets, there's cultural events, like Boulders, there's the Run for Your Lives, which obviously had a targeted attack recently, but those kinds of events. We know that libraries serve as a main hub for people who may be looking for further resources, may not be as well connected with resources, and may be typically considered to be more vulnerable populations. And so if there's a concern with vulnerable populations that may be accessing the library, that would be a really good event to reach out to us for, as we can not only get into what some of the main concerns might be, but also getting into if there's any counter protests going on or protests generally going on, or if there's any violent rhetoric going on online specific to either that population or that specific event. Hopefully that answered that question. Um, I've been having tech issues, so I'm struggling to get this into the chat. Um, there we go.
If you'd like
Some
to
other
email
things.
this to me, you're welcome to, and I can drop it in.
Okay, great. I think I figured it out. I've just had some
There it is.
keys that haven't been working. Some other things that the kayak does as well, we take the intake of suspicious activity reports, and those can come from a variety of people, whether that's law enforcement partners, private sector partners, or just the community broadly. We intake all of those suspicious activity reports. Generally, they go to local law enforcement, but if you're ever curious about if there's been any kind of potentially, if there's any activity that may potentially affect libraries in your area, that might be a way for us to look at prior events that have been happening there, subject to whether it's law enforcement sensitive and stuff like that. But we do take all the suspicious activity reports that come in. The other stuff on this list is primarily law enforcement sensitive information, but those are just an example of some of the things that the Watch Center takes in as well. And yeah, next will be Kelsey going over what our Preventing Targeted Violence team specifically can offer.
Great. Thanks, Sydney. Can y'all hear me? Cool. So I'm going to be kind of zooming in a little bit closer on what our team specifically does. So myself, Sydney, and one of our other analysts, as well named Tim. So our focus is all on preventing targeted violence. To give a starting point for like what that means, violence is a very broad term, right? So we have targeted violence at the top of this umbrella and then kind of forks out from there. So we have non-ideological violence, which is what Sydney focuses primarily on. So that's going to include bias motivated and hate crimes, a lot of school attacks, workplace attacks, any attacks in public places that are not ideologically motivated. So they're not connected to an extremist ideology, a terrorist group, anything like that. And then on the other side, we have the ideological violence. That's more of the stuff that's in my wheelhouse. That's kind of what I focus on. So anything related to domestic violent extremism, think like white supremacy groups, involuntary celibate type groups, anything with an extremist angle, and then homegrown violent extremism as well. And what that means is somebody who was radicalized in the United States, who lives in the United States, but was radicalized to like an extremist ideology associated with a foreign terrorist organization like ISIS or Al Qaeda, for example. So that individual would not be associated with or working on behalf of any of those groups overseas, but they are inspired by their ideology here in the United States and are acting on that ideology here. If we think, for an example, the attack that happened in New Orleans on New Year's was somebody who would be considered a homegrown violent extremist. So those are kind of the two camps that we kind of look at when it comes to targeted violence. And the whole goal of the Colorado Preventing Targeted Violence program, or the mission rather, is to build safe and healthy communities in Colorado, equipped and empowered to prevent targeted violence. But we're really taking a holistic, multidisciplinary approach to that and a public safety or public health approach to that. So we really want to partner with and work with organizations that are not just law enforcement. Yes, the law enforcement component is very important, but we also work really closely with mental health care providers, hospitals, schools, universities, libraries now, thankfully. So a lot of different community-based resources too, because we recognize that targeted violence specifically, starts at a community level. You notice the signs of those kinds of when people are on that pathway to violence and when they are starting to radicalize, that's really noticed for the first time at a local community level. So that's where we want to start kind of intervening and trying to de-radicalize and help people before it gets to the point where law enforcement needs to be involved and, violent action is occurring. So that's kind of the mission and the goals within that. One is to expand the capacity of Colorado to understand and address targeted violence, design a statewide collaborative ecosystem that adequately addresses targeted violence in equity informed and culturally responsive ways, And three, invest in sustainability to increase safety in Colorado long term. One of the big goals within our programs is to train and, inform the community about things to look out for. Bystander awareness is super crucial in this work. So we want people to feel empowered to be able to go out and kind of help these preventative efforts in their own communities. So we're really kind of the bridge for you guys. So we have some of the information. We want to give it to you so that you can go out and make your communities and your workplaces um, more safe. So the PTV analyst, specifically myself and Sydney and one other person, we work on intelligence analysis. So kind of strategic trends, networks, symbols, indicators, a kind of big picture, what's going on with some of these movements and groups and ideologies. We do a lot of tip intake and vetting, and then a lot of open source research to just keep up to speed on what's going on. And then we have really specific kind of inquiries for case support. So request records for threat assessments and checks, kind of identify like, symbols and lexicon related to specific cases that law enforcement or community members might be working on or concerned about, and then ongoing support kind of as needed with those things. So it doesn't have to just be law enforcement case support, right? Like if you have something going on in your organization that you're concerned about and you don't know if it rises to the level of law enforcement involvement or you don't want to get law enforcement involved right away, that kind of thing, you can always reach out and we're happy to consult on those things as well. And then just plugging a couple of resource hubs here. We have the PTV Public Resource Hub. So that target audience is really those community members again. So that includes resources and information on different topics related to targeted violence prevention. There's several case studies on there and then services for community members. And I'll make sure that the website for these things is included here at the end as well. And then we have a PTV portal that the target audience is really for safety and security professionals. So if anyone in your kind of communities or in your libraries qualifies for that. That includes a directory, training calendar, resources, and more of like a discussion forum. But again, that one's kind of for safety and security officials, whereas the community page is open for anybody. And then I really want to take time to highlight here the services that we offer. I know that Sydney touched on a couple of them already, but these are all free services that the state of Colorado offers to all of you. So we encourage you to take advantage of that. We have the 24/7 Watch Center monitoring for locations and events, like Sydney mentioned. I'll plug a couple more examples in here of ways that that could be helpful. Like it was mentioned earlier, I used to work in refugee resettlement. I worked very closely with libraries in that capacity for different English classes or citizenship classes, that kind of stuff. I never knew that these kinds of services existed before I started working for the state. So I think especially with when we think of vulnerable communities like those refugee and immigrant communities who really do rely on libraries for a lot of services, and there's a lot of events, at least I know in the Denver metro area, that kind of focus on those services. That would be the kind of thing that we could help do some social media monitoring for. Same with any like Pride related events. Sydney always does a bunch of threat checks every year for all of the Pride events kind of across the state of Colorado. So those are kind of some two high profile ones right now, especially some two kind of populations that we would be looking at, especially closely if there were kind of events happening at your libraries. And then threat checks for events, same thing. Physical site assessments, we can have somebody come on site and see how safe and secure your building is, give any recommendations for things that could make it safer and more secure. We have cybersecurity training. They can also help respond to any potential cyber attacks or vulnerabilities that might be happening for your library, and then 24/7 suspicious activity reporting on our website, targeted violence prevention training. So that would be our team coming in and helping provide the people that work at your library with some training, some kind of basics on violence prevention, targeted violence prevention specifically. And then we also have more kind of extremism awareness training, so some things to look out for related to different ideologies and different extremist groups that we know are active in Colorado. And then we have some grant opportunities as well that kind of fluctuate as the rest of the funding environment fluctuates. So those are kind of announced as available. But that's kind of an overview of some of the cost-free services that we do offer. And I would love to have any questions now. We wanted to leave plenty of time for questions and discussion. So anything that y'all want to talk about, Sydney and I are here.
Oh, sorry. There's something in the chat. Oh, um, oh, oh, apologies. We,
You're good. I'm looking at it now. Okay, in the chat, looks like recently we've had a couple of teenagers bring guns to the library. They were reported at the park next to our library. A teen was shot and killed. These things all happened within the past year. Would this be an example of something that you all could help give more specific insights into? First of all, I'm sorry that that happened. That's very sad. And yes, that is something that we could potentially, we always want to hear about when those kinds of things are happening because it helps us get a better idea of what's going on across the whole state. Because we might get, a report from one library in one area of the state and a similar thing in another library in another part of the state. And, we can kind of connect the dots when stuff like that is happening. Or if there's any kind of trends, especially within youth extremism, of them bringing guns into places or things that look like guns into places. That's common, especially with youth radicalization right now. So we definitely would like to hear about things like that if it's happening in your libraries. I don't know, the details of how much we're able to help will kind of depend case by case, but we would love to be there to support any way we can. And if nothing else, just to, again, try to keep an eye on what's kind of happening pattern wide across the state. I don't know, Sydney, if you have anything to add or if you want to chime in on any of the other questions.
I don't think I have anything to add. I think you covered that pretty well. It's something we'd want to hear, especially if there's more details into things and at the very least for trend tracking. I can answer the next question of how far in advance should we request any of these cost-free services.
before you go into that,
Ideally,
Sydney, can I just ask a quick follow-up on the first one? With that, is this something that people would use the CDPS underscore CIAC email to report to you or to ask questions of?
Kelsey, I think there's one more slide that will be our PTV specific email.
Okay.
You can absolutely email the one that I put in the chat as they're 24/7. And so if there is something that you want immediate assistance with, I would recommend that. But for all else and for preventing targeted violence specific things, I would recommend that email. I monitor that inbox when I'm working, so we respond to that as soon as we possibly can. So that would be the email I'd recommend to reach us directly.
And from that, then you would be able to reach back out to the library and talk through as far as what are potential either staff training items or resources or what sort of chatter there might be happening.
Yeah. Yep. If there's any requests for training, any case support requests, any questions, definitely send them to that inbox, and that will be the most direct way to get in contact with us. And then in that same vein, to request any of these services, we always recommend as soon as you hear about them, or if it is something that you want to look at, send it as early as you can. That provides us a longer amount of time to look into these things. Specifically, threat checks, they do need to be 2 weeks in advance for a proper threat check, which is a whole product from everyone across the CIAC. However, if you aren't aware of an event until pretty last minute, or if it's something that, escapes your mind and it's something that you didn't get to us within 2 weeks, that's fine as well. We can still do something that's not quite an entire threat check product, but we can still do open source social media monitoring. If there's a cybersecurity specific concern, that's something we can get cybersecurity to look at. There's still things that we can do, even if it's not super far in advance, because we have that 24/7 capacity. Still send it to us, even if it's not a certain time in advance, but we're able to do a more thorough long-term looking at things when we get it further in advance. Kelsey, I don't know if you want to add anything or answer the next question that I'm not sure I have an answer to.
Got it. Yeah, so can you share more specifics about what kind of grant funding is available? Right now, I don't have more specifics. In the past, we've done grants like supporting other initiatives for targeted violence prevention within the state. Um, those have gone to a wide variety of different private sector partners and community-based programs and universities and schools, just anything kind of focused on preventing targeted violence. We don't have anything available right now, and the funding environment is just a little unpredictable for the state right now. So I don't have any updates really on what is going to be available next. We're going to have to kind of stay tuned, but we will let everybody know when there are more available grant opportunities.
And some of the things that you've done as well include tours of facilities and recommendations. Is that correct? Reviewing training plans, intentions, and recommendations there, as well as some physical updates and changes to different security, like having doors with windows, things along those lines for line of sight. Is that correct?
I can take that. So our team as of right now is not, there's a certification process for proper physical site assessments that so far our critical infrastructure team has, and they do provide that for preventing targeted violence partners. However, it's only two of them. So it is something that we offer, and I still recommend reaching out for that if you would like a physical site assessment to look at maybe what some of your physical vulnerabilities are or certain things that you could implement or change in relation to your physical site. However, right now at the CIAC, there are only two people who can technically do that, and they have a pretty long list. So there's no guarantee on that being a quick process, but it is something that we can get you onto if that is something you're interested in.
Polly, you're muted.
Falling all sorts of parts today. One of the public libraries a couple years ago was going to be a target of what's referred to as a rosary rally, and it is I guess, a fanatical wing, is my understanding of the Catholic Church, and they did end up canceling it, but because it and I guess this event is something that's tied into book banning and pulling people together and all sorts of things. Is that something, or what would be the steps if a library became aware of something along this line that a library would do kind of in order to just find out how much of a concern or potential threat there is here?
I'll go. I was waiting to see if Sydney wanted to. Yeah, that's definitely something that if you wanted to, if you found out about something like that potentially happening at one of your events, you could reach out and we could do again like the full blown threat check to see if there's any additional threats or risks kind of related to that event. But our team specifically could also provide a lot more kind of background and insight potentially into what that group that is potentially showing up at your event, what they've done in the past, what their goals, stated goals are, what their social media chatter is about. So we could kind of dive deeper into that specific group if you were to know of a specific group that was going to be showing up at one of your events. So that could be kind of like our side of things. And then if we wanted to do a larger kind of kayak wide threat check to get all the different analytic kind of specialties involved, we could do that as well. But that would just be, again, an email to us, and we do respond as quickly as possible to those things, and we're able to get in touch with you right away most of the time and give you information pretty quickly.
So we can think of this in terms of short-term, instant one-off, but then also some long-range, long-term planning and review.
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways that we can help. So we can help like proactively, like you have an event coming up and you want to make sure that everything's good to go. And then we can also kind of help, reactively if something does happen at your event or if you do see a threat that could potentially be, showing up at one of your events or showing up at one of your libraries, help kind of provide more information in that. Or if you do have an incident that occurs at your library, if, kids are bringing guns or whatever the threat is, like was mentioned earlier, we can also help kind of put that in a larger context statewide of what's going on. With some of the trends that we're seeing, and then help respond in any way that we can as well. So there's definitely like kind of on all sides, there's a way for us to be involved and help support, whether it's preventative or kind of reactive to what's going on.
So we also have in the chat that someone would like to create a threat assessment team within their organization, which would use, it says here, a standard, consistent, multi-lens approach. Do you have any recommendations of resources for something like that?
I would recommend reaching out to that email because I think that is something that we can not only provide resources and recommendations on, we can also possibly connect you to an existing threat assessment and management team to hear how they might go about things and what that process might look like, as well as some team members that will have more knowledge specific to that. So if you can email that email address on that site, I think that's absolutely something we can help you out with. Kelsey, I don't know if you have anything to add.
That's the CDPS_PTV email.
Yes.
Okay. I think those are the questions that we're seeing in the chat. If anybody does have any other additional questions, if you'd like to go ahead and unmute to ask, you're welcome to, or if you want to drop them into the chat. Not hearing or seeing any that are in there. Thank you so much, Kelsey and Sydney, for joining us today and for sharing out this information. Also, for the participants that attended, we appreciate it. And if you have any questions, please, by all means, you said this either this email here, the CDPS_PTV, or the CDPS_CIAC CIAC. Those are the ways that people can reach out and get hold of you. Is that correct?
Yes. Thank you so much. I appreciate y'all.
Yes,
Excellent.
thank you.
Listening to us.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Have a wonderful day, and we'll get the recording out in the next week or so. Appreciate it. Thanks.